It's a sunshiny day here in American Samoa, and we are celebrating our 121st Flag Day. So I was there earlier on today. Faftai lava for the opportunity, and I'm glad to see and be part of this sharing. And let me get directly into our space. We started as three Samoan women of mixed ancestry who were interested in doing something while we are living for our people, not only in both Samoa, but for the Pacific and the wider world. So Dr. Line Noeme Mea Kruse invited Alu and myself into a connection to share with her in her class about our experience of working directly with our people in doing an advocacy role, being activists, and also our role as academics in the classroom. So that's how we came up with Mafutanga Ileva, or the connecting and the connection in and through our sacred safe space, I may say, of three Samoan women of mixed ancestry. So we have High Chief Matatumua Fa'alu Iuli, the director of Window of Hope. We have Dr. Line Noeme Mea Kruse, and myself, Joan Alleluia Filemoni Tofaeono. So I won't go into the details, as you may all have our PowerPoint on who we are and the work that we have done in Samoa and outside of American Samoa. But I'll go straight into our relationship of working in our connection and our connectivity as the Maitai Samoa, doing our work with our people. And we are connected through our political, our cultural, our educational, and working in a religious shift, especially with regards to women. As we all know, as Pacific women are honored, but as far as our role in the church and in the religious arena, we are considered the workers from behind. So that's where I come in, because I have been advocating in creating space, Pacific women and especially Samoan women, to allow them to fulfill their dream of being in ministry and in theological education. So that's a brief introduction of the work we do, and Line will continue on with our presentation, and I come back in.
Malo Joan, Dr. Joan. I'm just going to, if you would grace me with some time, I just wanted to give a little bit of background, and I'll just start with our beginning PowerPoint, if you don't mind, eh? So when I moved to Samoa from here in Laie, and I moved, if you all remember, during 2009 when the economy went bonkers. And my husband and I had no jobs. We were on food stamps. We couldn't afford to live here in the most expensive state in the Union. And my husband's family had asked him, please come home. So we had gone to Samoa. And while I was lecturing at the National University of Samoa, a friend of mine that was a journalist at Samoa Observer had said, hey, Uso, come in, write. We'll create a muck there. I said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And so we wrote about issues that affected women. And when I got to the National University of Samoa, I saw for the first time women that were academics, as Dr. Joan had alluded to, but women that were also strong in the culture, women that were strong in leadership positions in the villages. And I had never seen that before, because I believe, as Dr. Tovo had mentioned during the Talanoanga, we don't see a lot of Pacific Islanders in spaces of leadership outside of the traditional known spaces that are written about us by foreigners in sports. And I want to say sports because I don't, as a woman educator, it's not a lot of academics that are in leadership positions as of yet to my experiences. So when I was writing about the violence about women, I had moved to Tutuila, And that's where I had met the executive director and co-founder of Fa'alu. And we had worked doing volunteer work addressing at-risk youth, substance abuse, and violence, specifically within schools and villages. So when I created my class here at Brigham Young University of Hawaii in Laie, I created a Women in Oceania class. And I created specifically to study Pacific Island studies, addressing issues about gender-based violence. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring in different voices of doing the work and addressing gender-based violence, as Dr. Joan had addressed in her introduction of us, how we do different work to bring what I believe Dr. Siale had mentioned earlier, different spaces of the work. So Fa'alu works in cultural and nonprofits. She works in creating nonprofits that provide social services, work in the villages, work also in addressing it in cultural spaces. And to be honest, Dr. Joan, maybe you all know more Faifeaus also holding doctorate degrees that I know of that are women, but Dr. Joan is the only woman I know on God's earth that has a doctorate degree, but also is a Faifeau. And I think in the theological education, that is still dominantly a male space. So when we talk about gender-based violence, because we all talk about it in our homes, we all talk about it within our fellowshipping, that churches are a space which has a dominating effect in our consciousness to how we address violence. And for me in my space, I talked about it and bring forth the experiences that are addressed through students' voices, but also how higher education may silence how we address gender-based violence specifically to Pacific Islander students. For me in Pacific Island studies, because I also want to address how colonizing and colonial empires still like to keep us in silent silos, and in our case, in the VA. I sure hope that wasn't too long. I apologize, but I think it was really important to share that bit of info, if you don't mind. So the picture that you're looking at there is a picture of Dr. Joan and Fa'alu, where I had invited them to address gender-based violence in my course. And it was for students repeatedly over the years. It has been a very different space because we as Samoan and Pacific Island women, we address it in an open way in trying to create talanoa talanoa dialogue that perhaps they may find how those spaces may be created where you merge praxis and practical work, theology, so we're not so afraid of the structure of Christian religion, the ministers, the Faifeau, the Faletua, and then also how we can talk about it in education. So when we return to our homes, it will be educated upon and enlightened to open new spaces. Because Dr. Joan and I and Fa'alu believe that everything begins in the home. We can create safe spaces in our home, then as the children leave, that safe space leaves with them, if that makes any sense. So I didn't want to just keep going and going. I noticed when the earlier moderator was going, it was question and answer. So anyone can feel free, but I'm going to be very honest. I don't know how to open up my chat and also I show my PowerPoint. Educator, I'm not.
It's okay. I can help navigate any questions that come in the chat.
Oh, thank you, beautiful Melissa. I appreciate this. So here, what you're seeing here is the PowerPoint and this space on how we try to connect our different spaces to allow students to understand how in higher education we tackle gender-based violence, because it's in a space we believe it's freeing for students to speak honestly away from their families, away from their whaifeau, and the impression that if they address violence that happens at the home, that they are not disrespecting a family member that may be in that institution or something against their faith. And we mean no particular faith, any faith. In creating this, we like to also address this by this notion that we take the good, the bad, the ugly with us wherever we may go. Gender-based violence isn't rooted in an atoll, in a home, on an island, or on a continent, or on the water. It's rooted in our lived experience. So wherever we may go in God's earth, we believe that we take that with us. And we want to ensure that we approach it in that sort of way, Dr. Joan. I don't, respectfully to the whaifeau here. And that's why we directly address, and we all knows this as Pacific Island students, spare the rod, spoil the child. So there is always, which is where I'm going to go to in the next slide, these are definitions, and we provide definitions to give language to what we believe gender-based violence is. But if you notice in the definitions, whether you agree with it or not, it's not the point. The point here is to show how violence can have a language to it, how power and control are part of the discussion. And the World Health Organization definition, this comes from Dr. Jones' book. And this was important to say, and now I'm going to give you, if you don't mind, an anecdote. Last week, a student during finals, which is finals week here at Brigham Young University of Hawaii, was a Pacific Islander student, and she had shared, she wanted to do a project in her village, Amalia, in Samoa, on health awareness. And she gave this beautiful project, and it was excellent, but she had shared a story. When she was preparing to go on a religious activity, there are a set of questions that was given to her, written down. And one of the questions were, do you experience or do you have depression? And as any Pacific Islander knows, anywhere in the world, I would say it's been my experience, these are issues that are not clinically taught anywhere. We don't talk about feelings in our homes. So when you ask a Pacific Islander, do you feel depressed? The images that come to our mind is, am I sad? I cried in a movie. I'm really sad during a fa'alavalave or a funeral. Okay, I'm depressed. This student had checked the box and turned it in. When they had gone back, the person that received this checkbox had said, they looked and they had saw the student says they're depressed. Samoans don't feel like that. We're not depressed, change it. The point in which I'm trying to get to in gender-based violence is most Pacific Islanders don't have language as to what violence actually is, because we're raised with this notion that obedience, respect, loyalty, and fealty, Dr. Joan or Faifea will have to correct me on that, is rooted in a certain amount of discipline. Discipline and violence are synonymous in any Pacific Islanders consciousness. So what we wanted to do and explain here and try to create this open space is, how is it hidden? And we all try to express, which is why it was so important to have Dr. Joan and her theological experiences, not just in being a whaifeau, but actually in this institution of theology. Violence is hidden in the villages. Violence is hidden in our cultures. It's hidden in our languages. It's hidden too low in our families. And it's that which keeps that veil of silence that perpetuates the violence in our communities. But silence and violence are not necessarily known, because also when we interact wherever our feet may be rooted, we are very high on respect, loyalty, ideas about obedience, upholding the family name and culture. Also in our faith, and Tulo, whatever faith you may be, when we pray, we ask or receive forgiveness, then everything is, it's good again. And that is how we don't actually address the action, the behaviors from that action, which why the session before, when you talk about criminality, behaviors that continue that are never addressed. So the violence that's experienced perhaps at one space in our life or during our single digit years, when we go into our double digit years and the later on years, those core issues still are hidden and unaddressed in whatever languages that we may speak, even when we become parents, married, and parents and grandparents. This is how it is hidden. I'm so sorry, Dr. Joan, did you want to jump in?
Okay. I like to connect my story with that of Lynette in addressing the issue of gender-based violence directly. Going back to, I'm going to speak from the Samoan view. We all know as Samoans that sisters have a special place in their families, but things take a turn when they are married. And that's for me when I started to experience the feeling of there is gender-based violence in both Samoa. And being a woman in a church, once you're married, you are no longer considered the sister who is special, but you are attached always to either your dad, your husband, or to the family you come from. So your voice is often not taken seriously. And for a Samoan woman to be in theological education, that's that your voice, people would like to have your voice muted because our people are used to seeing the women as the wives of the whaiwhiau, and that the women are not supposed to be whaiwhiaus themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak about institutional violence. My story is a reverse of Lena's story. I was very involved in the work outside of Samoa, in Fiji, New Zealand, America, and Germany, where we were located for 22 years. And my voice as a woman was recognized as representing for Samoa. But when I started publishing work on violence against women and children since 1993 through the abuse of alcohol and substance abuse, and mind you, 93, and it's over 30 years. I have never seen that information used or recognized in Samoa. And the work I did on addressing that there is violence in the church in both Samoa and the wider Pacific, I am sad to share that a lot of our people do not recognize that as a contribution from women for the church and on the issue of gender-based violence. It says that all these women who are educated off island, and they come and they say that there's violence in Samoa when there is not. But I'm going to speak from the church. When you want to speak out in the church about the issues of violence, you are silenced and you are made to be silent. And you are looking at a woman that has been silenced and is still being silent. I have been unemployed since 8 months since returning to American Samoa. And I've been venting saying, we need more women to speak out issues. I don't understand. I know I understand the political situation in Samoa, But I do know because I spoke up on issues of justice issues within the church that most of the people outside of the church are not aware of. In order to silence a woman that speak about violence and the reality of seeing spouses of Faithiaus being beaten up in theological education in the church, nobody wants to bring that up. So at the moment, I don't have that voice anymore in the church because it's still a taboo topic, especially in the context where I am now. There is gender-based violence in both Samoa, I would like to admit, within the family, within the church. A lot of us women are using our, I believe that if you can't speak, you use your pencil as your voice. And I have been using writing as my voice, even though a lot of people do not read about what I've written about Samoa and the issue of violence and the abuse within our own dogma and our theological teaching. But at least I've tried to put that in writing as my voice. So I thank you for this space. I may have stepped on the toes of some Samoan who are very supportive of their church, but I speak from my personal experience. I will not give up on the church because the head of the church is God. I will not stop speaking. I will continue to speak through writing, but at the moment, I've been silenced to speak about this issue in Samoa. So Whakaitele Lava for this opportunity and for inviting us, the three of us in our mafutanga, to speak about the issue of institutional violence within the church and within the government. But it's beautifully covered under our Anganuu culture said, oh, it is the role of the sisters to sit as honorary whenanga, and the brothers will speak on your behalf. So that's how our violence is hidden from my view in the culture, in the church theology, in the church dogmas, and the way that we, and the things that we are surrounded. But I also must admit that it is within our culture that we also have the answer to the problem of gender-based violence in the Pacific because of the importance of family and ainga. So I go back to bringing in the life-affirming aspects in our anganu, in our culture, to respond to the issue of gender-based violence and its hiddenness within our society and our environment.
We've been practicing our connection and our presentation because of our different time zones. And the first day that we connected, Fa'alu, and she was still in America. And Dr. Joan had said she had just that day been able to, she was just that day able to gain employment. And the shifts as I moved through our PowerPoint, when you do speak up, which has been the experiences in the classroom in higher education, I always try to temper students that when you do speak up, whether it would be, as Dr. Joan had said, through the pencil, through education, advocacy, or in the different spaces that we move through in, there is no promise that there will be no retribution. And shifts, how is violence changing in Samoa and Oceania? The reason why this mafutanga for me, and the reason why I had agreed with Fa'alu to share what we are doing, is my experience with this. While I am, I'm going to be very honest, I really despise that term, academic. It's just not something that's in our vernacular as a Pacific Islander. just as a Samoan woman that teaches fellow Pacific Islanders, this topic, this theme, this Western ideology, the paradigm, if you say, it's not a foreign concept. It's not something that I learned about in a book. This is something that is known to me. And I think for most Pacific Islanders that speak on this or engage in this gender-based violence topic, whether in praxis or academia, criminal justice system on both sides, it's, for me, it's something that I know, but I know it's familial. And I found when I was working in the prisons in Southern Utah, I was there when the sheriff had changed the name. It was Washington County something or another. And the sheriff thought he was a jokester and he changed the name to Purgatory Correctional Facility. You must be part Samoan. And I was there, and when you're working in these criminal justice systems, I was providing at that time educational services for inmates to receive their GED. On most of the intakes, there is always this aspect, and I believe there have been many studies that shown most recidivism is due to and has causation from individuals, Pacific Islanders that have had some form of abuse in their home. And which is why I'm saying it, when what we are saying and it being hidden, it leads to behaviors, ideas, and feelings that are not addressed. There's no intervention. There's no words to say what you're feeling or what you had experienced or gone through, how you can address it. All you have are these, wherever you go, this rootedness and how you felt at that time. And for me, in gender-based violence, this is something that I've experienced, but it happened within the family. And so I think a lot of times in criminal justice system, when you're finding recidivists by Pacific Islanders, most of gender-based violence against women, particularly rape and molestation, whether it be in the villages or whether it be in the homes abroad, they're mostly committed by family. And because we believe in upholding family name and reputation, we don't speak on that. At least I didn't until very recently. And it's only been because of the cultivated safe space that Dr. Joan and Fa'alu and I have that I finally addressed it in my class. And in the one class that we had, students disclosed, and I can't tell you how I thought that was revolutionary for students to disclose things that they don't have names for, whatever native languages in Oceania they may be from and are rooted in. And I thought the shifts are in violence changing in Samoa and Oceania is that through the power of higher education and through the power of people like Dr. Joan entering spaces that have largely been tapu or kapu or forbidden to us, we can start to change perspective and give language in addition to voice to what a lot of time is unspoken. And I just wanted to, I think for our slideshow, we have strategies that nonprofits such as Dr. Joan and Fa'alu commit to and perform every day in the villages. And these are we are more than happy to share these with you. I just wanted to go through it just so you could see. And if you email us, we'll be more than happy to share these strategies with you to your different Pacifica students or fellows that you work with for Pacific Island prevention strategies, if you will. But I think, Dr. Joan, did you have anything else before we close in terms of our mafutanga?
Yes, I'd like to connect sharing from the work that we do with the praxis in the schools. That's a program that we have from Window of Hope. And that's a blessing in disguise from my perspective. I used to work for the government for 2 years when I returned on contract. And because a lot of people don't know that I was very direct and honest with my superiors, I was never hired back. But God gave me that opportunity to work voluntarily with the elderly population, which is part of our program, and also with the youth. We started our program when American Samoa opened 2021 with suicide. So Alu and myself and some members of our group, this is speaking about the working we are now doing outside of the usual space, but our own personal space to reach out. So we started going on the radio to have a connection with our elderly population and the wider community in American Samoa to speak about the uncomfortable issues that they are not willing to speak about. But we all know it's happening, like suicide. We've lost already 4 young people, and I think altogether 11, and we are still not talking about. We have programs, but we are not addressing the core of the problem, which links to violence as our. So those are some of the work that we are doing. Yesterday, I was very touched after 12 weeks at one of our schools. One brave 13-year-old, because I asked them to share about the changes that they have witnessed in their lives since talking about protection and prevention from all forms of abuse with younger people. And so she was brave enough to share at the very end and said, I don't have a flower, but I see myself as a book. A lot of my peers see me from the cover, but they don't know the inside of me. And this is coming from a 13-year-old. And just 2 days ago, another friend of mine sitting in this class took the time to listen and hear me out. And that's when the two of us, I experienced the salvation for me, a 13-year-old girl in this class experience from sharing with another 13-year-old. Those are the stories that we often don't hear, but our children are discussing their experience. And I want to follow up with her because I think there's a lot of hidden abuse in the voice of this 13-year-old that shared yesterday. That she is judged by her outlook, but people don't know what's happening on the inside of her. So I like to share that experience to bring in what we are actually doing outside of the government and outside of the church, and go directly to the spaces that we are given to work with the people that are often recognized for the unsung hero, which are predominantly the elderly population. So that's our focus now from Window of Hope, working directly with the elderly population who are no longer with our tower program, and working with the students that are with the school that is willing to be in partnership with us. And that's all voluntary service.
Dr. Joan and Lynette, I don't know how to thank you enough. I don't think I have the words to say thank you for talking on a subject that we as a people like to sweep under the rug or keep hidden. And the courage and the strength that you guys have in order, well, I was supposed to come in here because I was supposed to keep a sane voice, but it seems it's gotten the better of me in that we fight. We're here today because we agree that there's a battle that needs to be won, and that we're here because we want to learn how to address it and approach it. What you women have done in this space is short of miraculous, and I honestly just don't have the correct words to say thank you for this, because that 13-year-old could be my little sister, could be my daughter, could have been my mother. When we put things in this framework, it's amazing to me that we as a people will have so much quote unquote respect for the women in our culture, yet we won't do anything about our sisters and our mothers, but we can go home and beat our own wives, that we can take it out on someone we supposedly love. And this conversation is empowering, it's a reality, and there's not enough space that's available for you guys to fill this room with the knowledge and the strength and energy that you have. I'm going to open the fallout if there's anybody that has anything that they'd like to comment. You've obviously struck a chord here, Dr. Joan. Forgive me for being very disrespectful in your total title. I'm just going to call you Joan, Auntie Joan, because that's
Call
what
me Joan. Call me Joan.
But I can't read these questions. If anyone has a question, just unmute yourself. I'm crying so bad I can't even read because my glasses are steaming up. So you just unmute yourself. This is an open space. Speak.
Sorry, before anyone asks any questions, if I'm not answering, it's also because I wanted to be very professional in my first American conference, because I only do things really in Oceania. So for the first time, I put on eyelashes, but I think one is coming off, and I'm just very honest. So I can't actually read your chat right now for fear it might come down, and I think in America that might be embarrassing. But
I just love that you're so honest that you didn't even know how to even read the chat. So you do whatever you want, Lynn. Just take it off, rip it off. I don't care.
No, I have that same issue with my eyelashes.
Okay.
I just wanted to attest to the work that the women are doing here in Samoa. That it really is. I just really give it up to our our women. I think it's just all over. Just the look at our conference. Look how many women there are here, and but even here on the on the ground, here in Samoa, just just the work that a lot of the women are doing, and I'm just very, very grateful. And even my when I reflect and I look back, Mike getting into this field and addressing the issues that that we're all talking about, I think back, and it's a tribute to the I had a great support of women in my life. And I think that's I just just a testament to the wonderful work that women do. So I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Joan, Dr. Nina, for for the work that you guys are doing, and to keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I don't know if you all know Robert's all out there in South American Samoa, so he's pedaling at the same speed your internet is.
Can I add in after? Can I add in after Robert?
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you,
Go ahead.
Brother Robert, because I want to acknowledge that as brothers and sisters, we know our space, our vow. That's why I speak about institutional violence, because we are all part of an institution that keeps us chained, and we find it very hard to speak out because of the hierarchy that's already in place. So I acknowledge that, yes, we also are blooming as sisters because we walk alongside our brothers, but we need to dismantle the hierarchy that is keeping a space between us and splitting us into barriers when we work in the church and when we work in the government. So for my space to add on.
And I just wanted to add from listening to Kumuhina yesterday, what Dr. Jones speaks about, and which we all know in the higher education space that I'm in, I privilege Pacific Island voices, academics, people that work on the ground, nonprofits, because like Kumuhina had said, there is something important about experiences and being able to engage. When Dr. Jones speaks on this, I know which Mr. Tuivai and Mr. Toilupa had said, there is something that speaks to your heart because it's truth. It's a lived experience, you know. And so in the space where I teach Pacific Island Studies, which I teach on 2 coasts, I teach here on the North Shore on Oahu, and I also teach on the leeward side on West Oahu. And when we speak about these things, we know it to be true, which is why it's very important that we speak on this in our spaces. So what PICTAR is doing and what all of you are doing, and which was mentioned in the previous session, we have to become like how all the Papalangis are. We have to merge our spaces. We have to build the bridges. We have to overcome what we don't want to say, sometimes our ego, to want to be that person of leadership, to want to be that one to lead, and bridge us together so that we can build our resources, so that our language can be emboldened and empower, because we need advocates. But what I also want to emphasize, particularly because I lived in Southern Utah in this space, in academics and working in the criminal justice system, there are too many people that are non-Pacific Islanders that speak on our behalf. And that is one thing in Samoa that we do not have. We do not have foreigners that speak on our behalf. And so we have to speak on our own behalf. And while we have supporters, advocates, funders, organizations, they are to advocate, support us, but they are not to speak on behalf of us. And as you all are aware, and I know my Uso Oretsa is there doing work like health awareness, doing COVID testing, there is a way that we speak that will be recepted and accepted in how we approach our tone and how we engage, which is why we should lead Pacific Islander initiatives, which is why we know how to speak and perform the activities that are required amongst our own people. And we should not have foreigners do that on our behalf. That's why the mafutanga, the fellowship, is so important, and this engagement is important, but it's also important to recognize sometimes we have to let go of our ego. Sometimes we have to move that away for the greater purpose. Faftai.
Simi, Simi, you'd like to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement that we've seen women being hurt by men. What we have to understand that women are the very fiber of our being. It was a woman that God himself chose as a vessel to deliver the Son of Man. And here we are. Men consider them less than us. I don't believe that for a bit. It's my belief that we all come about in this life because of women. So it's our turn as men to protect them and hold them to a higher standard than what it seems to be right now in this life. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging that, Simi. I agree. I don't think there's a single male on this conference that doesn't agree with your position and your acknowledgement of the value of the woman in our, not just our society, but in our lives. Take away who we are as a people, take away who we are from our community, but the woman, that important in our lives. Thank you, Sumi. Anyone else wanted to chime in? Just unmute yourself. I'm just, yes, Melissa.
I'm just gonna take a moment and I apologize. The minute Joan started speaking, I completely lost it. And I also know that I'm talking a lot, even though I'm supposed to be emceeing and allowing participants to talk. This is the only time that I'm around Ocean to be able to talk about the work that we do. So I apologize. But I just want to say to Dr. Joan that your sacrifice for the collective is not going unnoticed. I know that what you're doing is for the greater cause of all the women in Samoa. And I love to hear how there are so many barriers, yet you're still working around them. And you're not allowing them to stop you and stop the work that's so important. So when I first started this conference, I did it because nobody was talking about it. And when I would talk about it with my white colleagues, I wasn't heard. And I was tired of not being heard. And I knew that the only people would hear me was my Ocean. And so I told my colleague, Gaynor Siatonga, I said, hey, let's just do this conference. I called Fee, Dr. Tovo, who was not a doctor at the time or a baby mama, to help me with this conference. And when I get to see all of the experts and community members and service providers and the feet on the ground and the people in the classrooms, those working in the jails and in the prisons, I can't tell you how much it brings joy to me to see us all as a collective to be able to have these conversations. A lot of us feel siloed, alone, isolated, overwhelmed, overworked, and underpaid to do work that we actually love to do. So I just wanted to lift you up, Dr. Joan, Dr. Kruse. I didn't know the alu you guys were talking about is my alu. And I had to text Retta and I said, Retta, is the alu they're talking about our alu? And Retta's like, yes. So I just want to say fafitai and love you guys so much all the way there in American Samoa. And thank you for doing that work. And now I'm going to mute because I still don't got it together.
That's all right. That's okay. Lily, I like all the amount of hearts that you keep hearting on your screen. You keep popping up. Would you like to unmute and say something? Every once in a while, I don't mind seeing the heart, but maybe something out of your mouth would be nice. So I know that there's a real person behind the heart. All I see is heart flashing in my screen. No, I'm not scared of your heart. I'll take it. Okay. You one of them shy people. Okay, I'll come back to you, sis. I'll come back. Melissa, your smiles are starting to don't make it like I don't see you. Hey, by the way, this isn't so you all turn off your camera, people. This is an encouragement to keep your camera on. Hoy. Yes, Sandy.
Yeah. These are questions I wanted to ask earlier, the earlier presenters. But my question, do you think the violence in our culture, in Polynesian islands, when we say being hidden, is it being intentional or unintentional? Because I'm more lean, I thought maybe our, especially at church, sometimes I thought it's like it's unintentional. They are so blind because I remember one time I went to this church, a church which I was a part of, and I brought up this issue of domestic violence, and everyone was going against me, and it seems like not an issue. But sometimes I thought, is it they really blind what's going on? And sometimes I thought maybe it's unintentional. It's a lack of awareness, and but the second part of my question is about parenting. I have a 9 and a 10 and a 12, and they're approaching the teenage years, and I really try to prepare myself for those years. But I'd like to ask about your, if I, right now I am concerned if I'm one of the, I cause some emotional scars in their first few years of their lives, and I want them to be healed, because I work at one of the most high risk juvenile facility here, and I recognize that majority, I asked them about their personal story, and majority of them, maybe 99%, there was an abuse at the earlier years. And I want to make sure that my kids, when they reach the teenage years, that if I'm one of those who, because I know I when I yell at them, there's a Palangi yell and there's a Polynesian yell. I remember my 10-year-old. Recently we had a conversation. I asked her about her memory. I asked her, do you remember in the previous years, did I do something that you still remember? And one of her memories said, do you remember when I broke that glass, like those glass we use for wine, and you yelled at me, and then she said, I felt you did not love me anymore. And I'm trying my best before they reach the teenage years that if I made some mistake in their upbringing, that I'm sure that they are healed, because I recognize in the previous presentations, there's always those who committed those serious crimes. There's always a scar, an emotional scar in the previous years of their life. So, what would you advise for me, and as a perfect dad, trying to make sure that my kids are healed when they reach the teenage years? So these are two parts of my questions.
Well, love you, Sunny. I'll give to Dr. Joan. Dr. Joan, if you could share the do you think that the church is intentionally covering this up or unintentionally covering this up?
I think it's both. When we go back, when our islands were more scattered and isolated, the only knowledge that our people had of the Christian God was through the missionaries. So the way they understood the Bible and the way they disciplined us, their children, was based on those education. Therefore, they were unintentionally following the teaching that they were given. But with the age of technology, and our church members and our church leaders are leaving the island to attend a lot of church meetings outside, they are informed. So let me come up. I think they are intentionally unintentional, if there is such expression. Did I answer your question?
Amongst our people, yes. It's kind of like Sandy's Palangi laugh and Polly laugh. We have an unintentional and an unintentional, intentional, unintentional in our language.
Well, can I add something? I think Sandy brings he asks a very common question. And one of the things, one of the reasons why I think that there's a lot of resistance, especially when we're talking about something like corporal punishment, right? Like spanking, right? We get a lot of resistance because for a lot of our, a lot of Polynesians, we hold, we like, it's like, we're proud of the fact, that either if we, if we were disciplined that way, and that's what, that's what made us. And so sometimes, when we are challenging something that we value, at least our perception of what we value, there can be a lot of resistance. And what we try to do here, because we get a lot of resistance whenever we're talking about things like that: disciplining, corporal punishment, spanking. Um, and one of the things that we've learned that has been very helpful is when we just try to teach certain principles. Like, for instance, with trauma, right? We don't know what causes trauma, right? We don't know. I mean, we don't know what, as far as what may be something to someone may not have that same effect to another child, right? We know that aggression, right? We know there's certain things, whenever we teach aggression, or how do we communicate aggression, right? Aggression is when we seek to destroy, seek to hurt, to intimidate, to instill fear, right? When we do those things, trauma, the probability of trauma increases. So we look at anything that we do in our lives, right? Are there things that we do in our lives that triggers any of that? Does spanking do that? Does the way that we talk to our kids do that, right? And so when we teach our people what is aggression, right, and then we teach people also what is the opposite of aggression, which is being passive, because that's usually what we do. We've learned how to respond to our emotions in these two extremes. We're either passive, we let things go, we just say onasai, leave it to God, just let people deal with, we just let God deal with it. And we don't really identify and deal with our emotions, but they build, and we're just being passive. They build, and then we explode and become aggressive, right? And so we just jump from both extremes. And so when we understand and learn ways of, like, being assertive, right? Assertive is not being passive, not being aggressive. But I think a lot of times it's when we, our approach on how we just say we shouldn't do this, right? We judge our people, or we condemn our people for not, instead of, we really have to educate. Because for a lot of our people, they're just doing what they learn. And then when they feel guilty about things that they've learned, which was not their fault, things that, it just adds even more. It just adds even more complications to it. So a lot of it is just teaching them that, hey, when we do this, this is the effect that happens. When you do this, this might be the effect. And naturally people will start to say, "Oh, okay," if they're good-hearted, right? They'll say, okay, that's not what I want. But maybe these are other ways on what I am trying to communicate, what I'm trying to accomplish. There might be other ways to doing that, instead of just always being aggressive. So a lot of it just relearning the things that that our people have just learned throughout the years.
Can I just jump in off of what Mr. Toilupa said? So Mr. Penitani, you had asked, right, how would we know, is it intentional or unintentional? And then Dr. Joan provided you an answer, and then I'm following Mr. Toilupa. In the work that I've done, and mine is specifically educational in prisons and social services to those that have been in prison, and then at-risk Pacific Islanders. I've only worked with Pacific Islanders, so I can't speak to any other demographic. And that I think that what Mr. Penitani, I'm trying to read between the lines, is who is going to tell you if it's intentional? And which is why I love Dr. Jones' definition that falls under the World Health Organization. You have to be educated on what one violence is, because is a sasal with the front of the hand, is that violent? Or is the violent the 2x4, the hose, or a kick in the face? Where is it? We always, as Pacific Islanders, we want that exact line in the sand, because until then, we're going to do everything right before that exact line. That's what we're thinking. In our minds, we're going to go all the way up into that line. And then from that line, then we'll know there's that measure, right? We want that quantitative measurement. Is it okay just the hand, but not the salu or the stick? And I like Dr. Jones' definition because in the work that I've done in dealing with demographics that have experienced abuse, is that you have that power over, which is Dr. Jones' terminology. If your children tell you that they feel demoralized, suicidal, hallucinative, suicidal, that they are exhibiting behaviors in which they're going towards drugs, ice, sleeping around too low, or doing things that are exhibiting things that hurt them, which studies show they're doing it to hurt you, Mr. Penitani, in a hypothetical situation, then that would be it. Because if you were then to come here, for example, in Hawaii, there's a high level of discipline. No one calls it abuse. And you would have to determine who do you want to educate you on if it's intentional, because it's only intentional if you consciously know what you're doing is hurting someone that you have power over. So the first step would be to inquire. The second step would be for you to have trust, to know who is it that you trust to ask. And a lot of times, particularly for single Pacific Islander, I don't want to say parents because that's too constrictive, guardianship, you would have to determine who you trust to advise you on that aspect. And then once you do know, it's a lot of times social media loves to tell you, then once you know, then it's violent. It's not that easy, because once you do know it's intentional, then what are the strategies and interventions that you are seeking to help yourself know what are the internalizations you're having with yourself, and then upon the power over others. And I think that's a lot of the struggles. You have these two, this angel and this demon. This is just a very lowbrow explanation. One is saying, no, that's not violent because you had much worse. And the other one is saying, oh, it's much more violent because now we're in this foreign space and people say you can't slap with the front of your hand. You can't slap the face, that's too violent. And that's where, as a parent, in the research that has been done that I've seen for behavior for Pacific Island students, is those that have power over those has to seek out what's intentional and then strategies on how to mitigate how you want to discipline. What is the language in the face of that discipline? Because I think it is ignorant to say that we are not going to have discipline and obedience in our homes. Is that, sorry,
No,
was that too
well,
long?
no, not at all. It's beautiful. It's well put. I think you're seeing a lot of heads bobbing up and down, because in there you laid out a framework that addresses three different approaches to the word discipline. You know, there's the discipline that we grew up and that we're used to, and it's acceptable in our families. There's the discipline that's acceptable in our culture. And then there's the discipline that's acceptable by law, quote unquote, depending on where you live, right? So I 100%, I understood it. That's what I got from you, Renee. So, Senny, was that okay? Did that work for you, Senny?
Marlo.
Wow.
Paul?
Yeah.
I recognize that someone has been very quiet. Officer Finai is looking at me laughing because he knows I'm talking about him. And he's been a solid participant of the conference, but I also want to just give him a moment. Brother Finai, if you have anything you'd like to add, I would love to hear your voice. And anything you would like to contribute to the conversation.
He was crying like all of us. Now you got him crying again.
Well, thank you. I think it meant for me to sign up for this this conference. I learned a lot, and I deal with our department. I'm the only poly. But I've seen and I hear a lot that I can exercise and help with our community. Here in Tuila, it's getting more and more people moving into this to the community, and it started to violence and domestics. It's growing. So I keep it very so helpful, and it means a lot to me. The conference that I need a lot of help to put together some for our department and especially our community, and even our I'm working particular with our youth in our church, in our ward, and it's I thank all of you that the presenters and the people that put together this conference. That's I wish there's more of us from here that they can listen and learn this conference. Then we can go together as a team to put together some for the community out here. But thank you all for helping, and I'm looking forward to learn more and communicating with all of you, that the help that we need, that I need, and we move along with that. I apologize for being so emotional, and I thank you for the opportunity.
No need to apologize. I'm sure everyone here shares your sentiment. And I'd like to personally invite you to come to Kava Talks one of these Thursdays, huh?
All right.
So I want to just take this time to again thank our presenters, Dr. Joan and Dr. Line, for providing such great information and insight to the work that they're doing back home.